So Lee Cronin's The Mummy is finally here, and for me this film was one of my most anticipated films of the year, off the back of Evil Dead Rise, which I thought was a real good body horror flick coming out of 2023, and really put Lee Cronin on the map as a figure within the body horror world who wasn't trying to make prestige horror films. He was trying to make fun horror flicks that were gross, disgusting, that had a lot of gore, that were out to shock you and to do things that you probably hadn't seen on screen before. He wasn't making A24 features, he wasn't making Blumhouse straight to DVD features. He was in a separate lane where he could kind of be seen as one of those directors that was taking on the mantle of body horror. That is now one of the most popular subgenres of horror. In my opinion, with Evil Dead Rise, Lee Cronin kind of suggested that he was much more interested in making films that were entirely based around this subgenre, and that he wanted to make films that were deeply disgusting, to the point that during my screening of Evil Dead Rise, I watched two separate couples get up and walk out of the cinema. It's probably not what you want to hear as a studio, but as a director, it probably is quite satisfying to know that someone out there was so disgusted by your film that they had to leave the cinema. So going into The Mummy, I had high expectations for this. I didn't really know what to expect from it from a movie perspective, given the fact that The Mummy is a storied franchise that has existed for nearly 100 years at this point, and it is now in the public sphere, and that is why Warner Brothers and New Line Cinema and Blumhouse Productions were able to pick this up and make a film that was entirely separate from anything that had came before it. So for example, the major Tom Cruise flop was The Mummy. That came out in 2018 and was so bad that Universal actually cancelled their full shared universe of what was going to be the Universal monsters. So that is, think Frankenstein, Godzilla, Pacific Rim, etc., etc. Before that, the most popular and well-known incarnation of The Mummy, depending on who you ask, was either the Boris Karloff version, which came out in 1932, or there was the Brendan Fraser version in the late 90s and early 2000s. This was an incredibly popular franchise for a long time, but I will say that I think that this is my first Mummy film. I got my adventure flicks from elsewhere. I got my adventure from video games. So this franchise was one that didn't bear a lot of fruit for me. I didn't have any connection really to it. So going into this, I had expectations based on what the director had done previously. I had expectations based on the fact that Jack Reynor was the lead, a accomplished Irish actor in his own right. I didn't have much expectations because of what came before in The Mummy. Therefore, I went into this feeling a bit mixed. I was excited about the performances. I was excited about what Lee Cronin would put into the film, but I did not know what the film itself would be. More than what I got, I expected a pure body horror feature film that would focus heavily on this sort of demon inhabiting a child and a family's attempt to get rid of that demon. And along the way, we would have some pretty gnarly body horror. I do not believe that I got that. What I believe that I got is an ambitious, expansive project based around the idea of grief and familial trauma, based on an element of a family just disappearing and there being no sense of closure, there being no sense of hope, essentially. And as I said, I think all of these aspects work and are successful when we analyze them singularly. However, when they come together as one film, I don't think that they are entirely successful. I don't think that I completely care about the supernatural investigation, the naturalistic investigation, as well as the family's trauma, all within this film, at the expense of getting some gnarly body horror that I expected going into this film. The film is almost more funny than it is scary, and in some sense I think that that kind of presents the film as being uneven, because Evil Dead Rise I thought was comedic in moments, but also was pretty gnarly, and that film was a lot more balanced. It used its humor to offset its horror. This film is comedic, I would say, about 20% of the time. It's only ever really scary about 10% of the time, and then the rest of the film is kind of just this familial drama piece. And ultimately, the issue with this film is that they have marketed this as a Cronin film. They marketed this as a follow-up to Evil Dead Rise. They marketed this to the people such as me who came out of Evil Dead Rise going, I know who this director is now. I really care about what he's going to do next. And what we got is entirely divorced from that. And in some sense, I almost feel a bit used by the studio because they've got bums in seats by going, hey, you liked Evil Dead Rise, didn't you? Come and watch this film. I don't think that this film is what anyone who loved Evil Dead Rise wanted. Decisions that they make on characters can be wanting sometimes. I don't think that the ending is particularly great. I think it ends twice. And I think that the second ending kind of takes a lot of the emotional weight out of the first ending. I think that the film is too long. That's not to say that this is a bad film. I think that the performances are pretty good. I think it's directed pretty well. As I said, I think it's expansive. I think it's ambitious. For the most part, it is well written. For all those reasons, I think that I actually enjoyed all of the aspects of this film. I enjoyed seeing Jack, Reynor, and Laia Costa pull themselves apart with the grief and the guilt of not knowing what has happened to their daughter. I enjoyed watching May Calamawy as she becomes more and more engrossed in this story of what happened to this child and the connecting thread with Jack Raynor's reach into the past of Egyptian demonology and what has potentially happened. I enjoyed all of these aspects. I think that the child, Billie Roy, who plays one of the kids, I thought was pretty funny, and I think handles some of the moments towards the end of the film where she is required to sell some of the body horror is pretty good for a child performance. I think that all of these aspects are pretty good. What really lets this film down is the marketing campaign. They market it as a Lee Cronin feature. They tell you to come to this film because it's a Lee Cronin film. And that's not what you get from this. It's entirely different. It's a family drama wrapped up as a body horror film. In some respect, I think that I'm probably going to come away from this review feeling like I've been a bit harsh on the film, and that is because I have went into this film and have gone, oh, this isn't what I want. I wanted more Evil Dead Rise. If you want to make your family drama film, that's fine, but don't tell me that it's similar or it's the same or it's a follow-up to Evil Dead Rise when I can clearly see that it's not. I think that this will be a film that I'll come back in 6 months, a year, 2 years' time, and we'll go, you know what, I was a bit harsh on that film. Because right now, all I can feel is harsh. Because the film, essentially, I feel has lied to me. They have told me to expect one thing, when in fact the film is something else entirely. And that is a fault of marketing. That is a fault of the studios behind this film, not knowing their film well enough to know how to market it. This should not have been marketed as a Lee Cronin film. I think that this is a very hard film to market, and I think that that's the reason why they focus so heavily on Lee Cronin. But as a result, as a fan of Cronin, I leave the film kind of disappointed. So I think I'll come back to this sometime down the road. Enjoy this more than I did now, because I don't think it's a bad film. I think the acting is good. I think the directing is good. I think the writing is pretty good. And still, I can't get beyond the idea that this isn't what I wanted. All I can do is wait for my retrospective to come in a year's time, when I go, oh no, I was wrong. But for right now, all I can focus on is the idea that this isn't what I wanted from this. This isn't what I was promised from the studio and the director. This is expansive, this is ambitious, this is more than he's ever done before, and all of those things are to be respected. But this isn't Evil Dead Rise, as it was promised to me. But I've hopped on to that point enough. I will leave it there. If you like this video, please like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz.